Sot në e pabesushme kam ftuar një mik të veçantë. Ai quhet Panagiotis Kantartzis dhe është pastori i Kishës së Parë Ungjillore Greke në Athinë. Panagiotis ka studiuar sociologji në Universitetin Pantheon dhe teologji në Shkollën Biblike Greke para se të transferohej në SBA për studime të mëtejshme në Universitetin e Bostonit, si dhe në seminarin teologjik Gordon Conwell. Panagiotis ka mbrojtur gradën doktor i shkencave në Universitetin Aristoteli në Selanik dhe qysh prej vitit 2019 shërben edhe si koordinator për City to City Balkans. Do të diskutojmë së bashku rreth unitetit që sjell Ungjilli mes njerëzve me etni të ndryshme. Do të flasim gjithashtu për iniciativën Qyteti për qytetin, si dhe unitetin ndërmjet denominacioneve. A është utopi të ndërrosh për unitet dhe bashkëpunim mes kishave, aq më tepër në Ballkan, ku më mirë se çdo gjë tjetër kemi treguar se dim të nisim konflikte, por jo se si t'i zgjidhim ato. A ka fuqi Ungjilli që të na bashkojë rreth kauzave të mëdha në rastet kur etnia apo krenaria personale historikisht na kanë ndarë? Ju ftoj të ndiqni intervistën. Panagiotis, thank you for coming in our program.
It's my pleasure.
So, when I was in Greece a couple years ago, they baptized me with the name Costa. So I would like you to have an Albanian name.
Okay.
From Panagiotis, you can choose either of those two. Either Petrit or Perparim. What would you like?
The first one is easier.
Petrit.
All right.
Well, thank you for
having me.
Thanks for being with us. I'd like to start our conversation by asking you, what brings you to Albania?
Thank you, first of all, for inviting me and having me in your program. I'm here to be part of a conference where different pastors and church workers from various denominations and church backgrounds, they come together thinking about collaborating, having the gospel at the center. So I'm here as a speaker for that.
But that's not the first time you have visited Albania, as I know. So when was the first time and what brought you at that time?
It was many years ago. I came to Albania many times, but most of the times I would come through Corfu because I would visit the city of Saranda, which the port is, very close to Corfu. And what was bringing me there was the fact that our churches in Greece have played a role to plant a church in Saranda. So there was this connection, and for a period of years I was serving on the missions committee of our church family, and so I would go and visit with the church, and actually I have stayed for a whole week once with the pastor there, and I was ministering, and then in many different occasions, summer camps, I came again to do the wedding, and I only came once in Tirana because I visited a Bible school in Durres many years ago. So I have this connection with Albania.
Yeah. And I know that in your church in Athens, you have Albanians in your church?
Yeah, not only in my church, but in our churches, there are many Albanians. Actually, there is an Albanian church, ethnic church, and we have a great connection with them. Actually, a couple of months ago, I was invited to speak in the conference that they're doing in Athens. And also we have many of our new churches that we have planted that a great majority of them would be Albanian immigrants or second generation of Albanians, yes.
That are now involved in the church.
Yes. I mean, one of the amazing thing about Albanians, which I cannot think of any other nationality that can do that the way the Albanians do it, is to learn the language. I mean, they speak Greek very easily and with a great accent. So after a while, you cannot tell where they're coming from. So it's really easy to kind of assimilate and become a vital part of the society.
Well, that maybe shows that our language have not been as separated to each other in the past.
Yeah.
So that might explain how easily we can learn the language of each other. But despite that fact, we know the tensions in the, living in Balkans. It's not always a pleasure, concerning the history. But still we are brothers and sisters because we are created by the same God, and we are all humans. But there is another sense that I know you have talked and you talk about being brothers because of the gospel.
Yes.
So what would make me and you being brothers in that sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. And the truth of the matter is that even beyond the gospel, in reality, we may have on the political level fractions and differences, not only with Albania and Greece, but in general here in the Balkans. Churchill said that we produce more history than what we can consume here in the Balkans. But in an interesting way, even on that level, as far as the people is concerned, there are so many affinities, and we really feel that kind of proximity. So even though we fight and we have all these, ethnic things and ambitions and disagreements, I think we, at the same time, even on I'm not talking spiritually at all right now, but in the Balkans, we are kind of, like I always use this image of being part of a family, the siblings, the siblings rivalry, as they say, brothers and sisters, they fight all the time simply because they're brothers and sisters, which means they have this connection. Of course, being Christians, that is changing. I'm not saying that it improves something, but it changes, it puts the game and the discussion on a different plane, okay? So there is a totally different basis upon which we are discussing now who are we, because there is a totally different way that we build our identity. There is, Luther made this distinction, which it can be problematic, but it can also be helpful in some respects. He talked about the two kingdoms. So there is the kingdom of man and the kingdom of God. And he was emphasizing there are two different sets of rules and ways of existence in these two kingdoms. So there is the kingdom of man, people think one way, but then we are all part of the kingdom of God, where there are totally different values, totally different principles, a totally different way to understand myself, to identify myself, to understand you. And of course, in that context, as we read in the scriptures, that there is no Jew and Gentile. Greeks invented the barbarian, because whoever didn't speak Greek, it sounded to us like speaking barbar, so we gave the name barbarian. But whereas this is on that plane, when you come to the church, all these things, they're relativized. Because there is a totally different way to understand ourselves. And it's very interesting that the first heresy that the church had to face was not the Christological or the Holy Trinity or anything of that. It was the heresy of nationalism, with the Judaizer, that you need to be, Jewish in order to become Christian, all of that. So
circumcised and
exactly. So that was like you need to have some ethnic characteristics, and so there is a totally relativizing all of that. So they have a place, but in the new creation, all these old elements, these are elements of the old creation, of the old order.
In your long years in ministry, have you seen, I'm sure you have seen, but would you bring some examples of the gospel bringing racial healing? Perhaps you have seen in your church, or only in the history of the church? Yeah,
of course, in the history of the church, yes and no. The gospel is there. The question sometimes is how we apply it. But I wouldn't say, and there are two levels. There is the personal level. If you ask me, have you seen people changing their attitude, seeing the other? I would say yes. Now, in terms of nations and in a more collective sense, I cannot think of from the top of my head some examples. But as far as the personal level, yes. And we had a conference last November, a few months ago, and we had people from the Southern Balkans, but we also invited people from Turkey and Cyprus. And interestingly enough, it so happened they didn't know each other, to sit like next to each other in the pews in the church. And then we had this time that we said, turn to the guy who sits next to you and introduce yourself and pray together. And there you have the Cypriots and the Turks sitting next to each other. And of course, there is a moment of awkwardness, but then, you realize that there is something which is deeper that unites you. And so that does not mean that, all the other stuff don't, but it helps you to discuss all the differences under a different light, I think.
So I can understand what does it mean for an atheist to become a Christian, or perhaps someone from a Muslim background like myself to come to know the gospel. Could you tell me what does it mean for a Greek Orthodox person to come to know the gospel?
Yeah, that's a very good question as well. First of all, let me answer a question you didn't ask, whether there is the gospel in the Orthodox Church. And I would say that is how we define the gospel. If the gospel, and that's how I would define it, it's a public declaration of God's act in history through Jesus Christ. So if the gospel eventually is Jesus Christ and his story, like his birth, his death, his resurrection, obviously the gospel is in the Orthodox Church, meaning, all these events are there and celebrated and in the liturgy in many different ways. Now, if I may say that there is something missing, is primarily, and if there is something that perhaps Protestantism recovered, because I think it is in the New Testament, is this personal experience with all of that. So that these truths and this history is being appropriated by faith personally in my life. Now, talking about the personal appropriation does not cross out the church and the collective but I think that for many people in the Orthodox Church, and again, there are many exceptions, but for many people, being a Christian simply means I belong to this group. I was baptized, I go from time to time to, and many times I don't even understand what is going on, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So I think that what it has to be recovered is that I need to appropriate the gospel, which is there, by faith for my life, so that can bring this personal transformation. So I think a lot of people, they're lacking this personal experience, that Jesus Christ is my personal Lord and Savior. I always like to tell this illustration, which is kind of the Protestant ethos. Billy Graham is a well-known evangelical, a well-known figure, an American pastor and preacher. So he was giving an interview once, and the journalist asked him, and how can you be so sure that Jesus Christ exists? And Billy Graham, in all honesty and simplicity, said, of course I know he exists. I was speaking with him earlier this morning, talking about, his devotions and prayer. So there is this kind of sense that, our union with God through Jesus Christ is not something impersonal, is not something vague, but it's a personal experience, a personal relationship. I think that is what is not emphasized and is missing.
You are in Albania because you belong to an initiative called City to City. Could you explain what is that?
Yeah, City to City is a network of churches across the world, but there is this more regional, grouping, City to City Europe, that unite churches across denominations around certain values and principles. So a big one, as the name says, betrays, is that it's a love for the city, for the good and the blessing of the city. So cities are important. And also another very important word is the word gospel. that we want to have a gospel impact in our cities. And so we like to use this expression gospel-centered, meaning a balance between churches that they focus on your ability to obey, on your performance, legalistic, or churches that they meet totally antinomian, as we call them, like the hedonism and everything goes. So the emphasis on the grace of God or the gospel. So that's another value. And of course, bring the two together, how you can have a gospel impact in the cities. Then the third element is the church, is by planting churches. So it's a church planting network that is across denominations, and the number one emphasis is to encourage gospel-centered church planting, and also to train and empower people being out there doing it.
And it seems that you want to do this, you want to encourage a spirit of unity among churches in order to cooperate and do those things together?
Yes. I mean, like the first level is for churches to realize that they need to plant churches. Now, the second level, when you think, okay, how we do that, how can we really have an impact in our cities? Like at the second level, what you come to realize that in order to really have a gospel impact in your city, actually, you cannot do it on your own. You need more churches, different churches, cooperating. Like if you think about different churches, each church has her own personality, her own DNA, strong points, weak points. So we need each other. We cannot do it by ourselves. So for example, in Athens, I still remember visiting a Pentecostal church. We had a common prayer meeting, and I went to be that meeting. And I've seen a couple of young guys who were in our drug rehabilitation center. So they were part of that rehabilitation center. They got clean. They came to faith, and they chose to go to church, to that Pentecostal church, and not to ours. We are a more Presbyterian Reformed church. So once they saw me, they felt a little bit awkward. So I approached them and I said to them, listen, guys, I know if I was in your position, I would come to this church as well. Meaning that church made way much more sense to them. We have a pipe organ, I wear the ecclesial collar, like my style of preaching is kind of more intellectual and this and that. Why? Everything we do is exclusive inclusive. The fact that I use Greek as a language for my sermons means that includes those who understand and excludes those who don't. So there is no one, it's impossible for one church to really accomplish everything. So we do need collaboration, and we do need more churches, and we need to realize that.
What do we lose if we do not work for the unity among churches and among believers?
Yeah. I would say that there are two different levels. I always like to think that we need to distinguish that there are stages, because we can talk about unity, and that's a very big topic, okay? There are different stages towards unity and different levels of unity. So there is a first level, is accepting each other and, blessing each other. And of course, a higher level would be working together towards a goal. That is even more complicated. So you need more stages to get there. So I think that is an important clarification, so that we don't put everything in one basket and, it's distinguished the term. So I could say that what we lose the totality and the fullness of the beauty of God, because like I use this illustration many times. That is true not only for churches, but even in our marriage. I always say that my wife experiences the kingly, like God is a king, the royal aspect of God through me and the way my spirituality, the way I experience God, and I live out my relation with God daily. And I experience through her God his mercy, his compassion. Like in Hebrew, there is a very interesting word that describes God's compassion. It's the word rechem, which actually is used for the, it's a female word that it emphasizes the motherly, the womb. Is used in Hebrew. So through the spirituality of my wife, I see this aspect, which, I'm more kind of, okay, let's go out there and do it. And, God is doing that. He's the sovereign Lord, but He's also the compassionate. And so being together and experiencing God together with the other. So, for example, a Pentecostal brother or sister, he has this kind of zeal, this kind of excitement that many times I'm lacking. So this, this kind of being together enriches our experience of God. So that is a very basic level. So we're not talking about working together, ministering together, but it's simply experiencing God together, which is, I think, a starting point.
Does it make it hard to build unity and cooperate because we live in Balkans and we are that kind of people? As you said, in the family we have conflicts, we speak out loud, and now add there the denominational, theological divisions. Is it utopia to talk about in our context?
Yeah, to begin with, I think it's difficult everywhere. Even more in the Balkans, and I'll explain why. But it's everywhere. It's not an easy thing. Unity is not an easy thing. I mean, think of how many denominations exist out there. And some of them, they're for good reasons. I mean, at the end of the day, we may differ theologically, and that's okay. But, many of them, as I say many times, we multiply by division, which is our evangelical way of doing math. So there is that as well. So definitely there is the sinful human nature and selfishness, pride, and and difficulty to forgive and forget and accept and things like that. Now, in the Balkans, I think we have this expression in Greece that in all parts of the world, someone is considered innocent unless is proven guilty. In Greece, everybody is guilty unless it's proven innocent. I don't know if you have the same thing.
It makes sense for our context.
Exactly. So I think that, like, by definition, and that can be explained historically because we have lived under the Ottoman Empire for a long, long time, there is always a suspicion. Like, for example, in order to start a company in Greece, you need 100 different papers, and it may take a month. In the United States or in most European countries, you can do that over internet in 2 hours. Why? Because we have this sense, you're gonna get it, you're gonna get me, or somehow,
you want to chip the system or something.
Yeah, or can I really trust you? So the level of trust is not given. So this is what. On the other hand, we have other virtues. And we are more hospitable and perhaps somebody may
value personal relationships.
Exactly. So the family and personal relationships and all that. So, and me being more outward, open and more easy to communicate. So that's why we have our own challenges. Let me put it like this. But as human beings, unity is not an easy thing. Think about the first crime ever in history. Abel and Cain, it was for religious reasons, and it was jealousy, why God blesses him and not me, and all of that. So from the very beginning of our history, this is a reality there.
Yeah. Could you give us some ways, practical ways of how to cooperate with each other in our churches?
First of all, I think you start with your attitude. Before you start with specific actions, I think it has to do with your attitude. The first step is to start getting to know each other. I think it's very important. to be together in not necessarily only in spiritual environments, meaning pray together and discussing about ministry.
But social times.
Yeah, even enjoying the friendship or just relaxing together, and so that is, I think there is this level which is so important, is very important. Of course, there is also this other level that has to do with praying together and praying for each other. I think that is something which is very, very, very important. And again, seeing around in the history, we realize that most movements started when people across the spectrum, they started praying together. So I would say that these two are really very important. And when you pray for the other, and when the other is not someone who is unknown, then the third thing would be to really be committed that you will be happy and joyful whenever there is gospel growth wherever. So if your church is growing, I will celebrate. I mean, we have this thing in Greece. We say, yeah. But, so we're always waiting when somebody says good things. We're always waiting. Okay, now he will just say something that, so to say it without but and other, say, what, I'm so thrilled that these people the Lord is blessing them, period. I think these are very important things that they have to do with the atmosphere. One of the most telling illustrations that helped me in my pastoral ministry is this. There is this story about the father who takes his son to the Museum of Natural History. So he sees the little guy sees all these huge skeletons of dinosaurs. And the young guy is kind of, freaked out and says, Dad, I mean, were they real animals like that? The dad says, yes, of course, they would call dinosaurs. And where are they today? The dad says, oh, they're extinct and they're not anymore. So the kid, in his innocence, says, and who killed them? And the dad thinks for a while. And after thinking for a while, he says, no one. The climate changed. And for me, that is very important. Let's say if this unit is a dinosaur, if mistrust is a dinosaur, if strife is a dinosaur, many times we're trying to address that. But what we need to do is to change the climate. And when you change the climate, a lot of things will fall into place. So I think that is very, very important to develop that kind of friendship. But also, I think it is important in order for unity to have kind of a backbone, some structure, to come around some common values and to also develop a common language. I would see these two, which are related, they would be very important next steps before we say, we form this organization where we do this and that, and you are the director, and we meet twice a month, and all these are important. But for me, to go there, in order for those to happen, like for example, in Greece they just passed a law to prohibit smoking in public spaces. Now, interestingly enough, several years ago, they tried to do it. And in 1 week, they took it back because nobody was paying attention and everybody was laughing at it. And this time it works. So all I'm trying to say is that, we need laws and we need structures, and that's important. But unless there is a preparation in terms of attitudes, you don't go anywhere. So obviously the Greek society was ready to accept that is a good thing and we would like to do it, and so they were able to obey. So I think that level is very important.
With the levels of cooperation, I guess you also have in mind that this might go toward, for example, building a new initiative with joint forces, or perhaps planting a new church. If you would add that to it, my question would be, talking about different denominations, different groups, and of course you have to negotiate something because you are not in the same way of doing things and same way of thinking about things. What would you be ready to negotiate theologically and what are non-negotiable?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's not an easy question to answer. So, for example, in Greece, there are several churches, different denominations, that I would say that they are gospel-centered. They teach that salvation is by God's grace, and the center is the gospel. Now, they may differ in issues of baptism and ecclesiology and structure and several other things, but it's a core belief. So I would be happy to cooperate with them on a different level. Now, again, when we say cooperate, it's very tricky, and we need to admit that for two different denominations to come together and plant a church. Of course, the question would be, okay, this church cannot be both. It has to be one of the two. Which one? So that's a complicated thing. But I don't think that this is the issue. I mean, that is very unusual to have. But most of the times, you have several churches that they have a vision for their city and say, you know what, we would pray to have 5 new churches in these 5 areas. So if you happen to take the initiative and you have the heart and the people to go there, I commit that I will help you. How? First of all, I'll pray for you. Very important. Second, if there are some people from my church who would be willing to come, I will encourage them because they live in that neighborhood. Third, even financially, why not supporting and helping you do that? Because we are happy that there is a church there. Fifth, okay, let's train your man who is going to plant the church alongside mine and his, and let's do training together. So let's share resources so that we maximize our resources instead of just dividing them up. So that's, I would say, it's a way I would approach it. Now, in our particular denomination in Greece, the Greek Evangelical, talking about negotiables and non-negotiables, in our history, I will now over-exaggerate for the sake of simplicity. There were 2 trends. One which was developed in the Asia Minor and Turkey, Greeks living there, and Protestant churches being planted, and then one which was in the mainland. So after the 1920s, the extensive population, they all came together. So the question there was, okay, do we form separate churches or can we be under one roof? I'm so happy that our forefathers says, let's be under one roof. So for the issue of baptism, for example, we are perhaps the only Presbyterian, Reformed Presbyterian covenantal church in the world that we say, yes, we baptize infants, not, in the understanding of the Reformed faith, not, saving them or anything like that, but we baptize infants. Mm-hmm. However, we say that in the New Testament, there is another mode of baptism. And when a believer is baptized, in that case, baptism has the place of confession, like a public testimony, blah, blah, blah. So we have that in our confession of faith. Mm-hmm. So this is a way of saying, you know what, we're not going to separate over the issue of baptism. Mm-hmm. We agree over the issue, the 5 solas, sola scriptura, gratia, fide, so Christus. Yeah. Okay, so these are the non-negotiables. But, there are other issues that if we can find a way that we can, maintain unity, I think it's important. It's a very good ethos.
Mr. Panagiotis.
See, you baptized me with an Albanian name, but
I will leave you with your name at the end. All right,
at least I know who I am at the end.
You can have your name back.
Okay, thank you.
So, I would love you to address our viewers with a final message after you have experienced Albania and visiting for a couple years in the past, now, and having some relation with Albanians in your church. So what would be a final message for us?
I think you have something which is unique. You live in a unique moment in history. there are not out there that many churches that are so young and fresh. So you're 30 years old or something, okay? So that gives a vitality. It's a vibrant, of course, there you also see the danger. So I would say you need wisdom to somehow use this vitality, this freshness, and actually you also live in a quite open society for the gospel. I'm not saying receptive, but open. So this is not the experience, let's say in Greece or in many other countries. So you have this fresh movement, new churches, excitement, young people, which is a good thing. But it's the same thing like being young. So I think how you balance out these things, I think that would be the challenge. So use your vibrance, your vitality, but at the same time, I think it is important to also have that sense of humility, because young people tend not to think that they know everything. That sense of humility that, you know what, I have all these good things, but I need also to learn from whom? From the Church Universal.
We close here, but maybe we will have another time to conversate together. I would love to come and visit in Athens.
You're more than welcome.
I heard that your church is very close to Acropolis.
Yes.
So we might have other conversation about
yes.
theology, church history, and philosophy. So thank you for being part of the program.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this program.
God bless you, and
God
safe
bless you
trip
too.
back home.
Thank you.